marketing by design, building IP with reach. Kind of what's the purpose of this talk? Basically, as we all know, there's a ton of obstacles to creating a hit title. Great game alone isn't enough, as we know. Discoverability, differentiation are both keys. And this is especially the case when you're an indie and you don't have the same big budgets for CPI and cross-promotion and big marketing spend, et cetera, et cetera. So really at the core, a really strong IP can really maximize your chances for success. It can be one of your greatest assets in order to really help set you apart. One of the advantages, especially again from an indie perspective, is it doesn't require a ton of capital. Often it'll require a bit of investment, but that doesn't necessarily mean capital all the time. It can help you kind of build your marketing as you're building the game as a whole, which can be really helpful. And then it can also open doors for other revenue channels further on down the road, either with licensing opportunities or cross-promotion with other partners, et cetera, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So really the goal at the end of the day is hopefully this talk will help provide some practical IP building and kind of assessment tools that'll help you maximize your title's reach. And when I say reach, I basically mean engaging as many members of your target audience as possible as effectively and efficiently as possible. So, it's obviously so hard to get eyeballs. It's making sure that every single eyeball that you get is able to be converted into a download or to a sale. And then in general, although I'll be talking a lot about Bag It, which is the game that we made, a lot of these topics are being brought up kind of from as broad a perspective as possible, so that hopefully it can be applicable to the wide variety of games that obviously we're all working on. So another key thing here is this isn't really a session on how to market your game. It's much more about how to be market conscious when building your game. So real quick, I am one of the co-founders of Hidden Variable Studios. We're a small indie developer based down in Los Angeles. 6 people. Were founded early last year. I was also the creative director of Bag It, which is our first title. It's a grocery bagging puzzle game, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. We have almost 5 million downloads to date across all of these fine platforms. We've been really well received, both critically and from our fans. And we've also had really good broad media coverage from everything from USA Today to Entertainment Weekly we've gotten features in, as well as kind of core gaming sites like Kotaku and Joystick and G4. So in many ways, that's not only hopefully testimony to the game, but also to the strength of the IP and how it differentiated itself from everything else that was out there. So a strong brand can go through and help create those opportunities. So this is kind of Bag It in a nutshell. As I said, it's a grocery bagging puzzle game. It's kind of, as we've described it, Tetris meets Toy Story in the supermarket with a fragility twist. So you basically go and pull these little grocery characters down from the conveyor into your bag, and you want to make sure that you fill up the bag as efficiently as possible without breaking anything. So you don't want to put the milk on top of the eggs, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, as you can see, all the groceries have their own personalities and characters as you go throughout the game, and we'll talk about this a bit too. There's also actually relationships and kind of little mini narratives that exist between the characters that you kind of uncover as you go. You can see a little bit there with Spilt, who's our milk, and Sunshine, or Orange Juice. She's very fond of him. There's kind of that little high school romance thing going on there. But that's kind of the core idea behind the game. We also have a whole host of modes. Rampage is one of them, where you're actually encouraged to smash things. So it's a little bit of catharsis. So we have a lot of variety in the game as well in order to encourage it. So this is just to give you guys a little bit of context as we're going through. So the 3 keys that we're going to be focusing on for maximizing reach. First off, uniqueness. What is it that really sets your game and your IP apart? And also, how is that uniqueness celebrated? It doesn't really matter if you've got the coolest mechanic or component or element in the world. If it's 2 hours into your game or it's really hard to go through and root it out, then no one's going to see it and it doesn't really matter. Relatability, which to some extent is kind of the opposite of uniqueness. What are the things that are familiar to the audience that you're able to tap into and engage them in a meaningful way? And then intrigue. How do you go through and build intrigue with both customers and the press, which, as we'll talk about, really aren't all that different at the end of the day, but basically piquing people's curiosity about your game as a whole. So the first item here, uniqueness. One of the big questions is, can you really truly be unique? What does it take to be unique? And there's a lot of, obviously there's millions of games that are already out there. Obviously everything has been done already. People want to say, or people want what they already know, as we've kind of touched upon. And the fact of the matter is that it's hard. There's, making unique content isn't easy. There's a reason why a lot of people just go through and, slap a chicken on it, or whatever it is, go through just to infuse the existing game with something really simple and easy. But I think if you're able to flesh out a really powerful IP that resonates with people, then you're really setting yourself up for success. So some of the techniques and easy ways in which you can go through and do that. It's just a quote I really like. Wouldn't be a good PowerPoint without a pretentious quote. But the real voyage of discovery consists not only in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And this really kind of reflects our philosophy at Hidden Variable, where we're all about kind of finding the fun in the everyday world around us. But I also think it's a really great creative exercise for you to reflect and look upon your own game and look at the individual elements you have and see if there's interesting ways in which you can go through and tweak them in small and interesting ways. So providing a fresh perspective on something familiar, obviously, is something that can be really valuable. So one of the best ways in order to go through and find those cool, unique moments is to embrace surprises throughout the development process. As many people have given examples for, you may find at the end of the day that the strongest part of your game is actually something totally different from what you actually set out to create at the very beginning. A critical part of this, though, is making sure that you've got a surprise-friendly development environment, which means you have enough flexibility in order to go through, and if a member of your team has an idea, they feel comfortable communicating it, you've got the right kind of creative culture where everyone feels like they can contribute. You have enough flexibility in your schedule and your scope in order to, go down a rabbit hole if need be in order to explore a number of these new ideas. You really want to create an environment where you can go through and capitalize on these opportunities. Otherwise, they'll just fall by the wayside because we don't have time, and then that's really a missed opportunity at the end of the day. So looking at Baggett, it's actually a really good example of this. We really started as just a really simple mechanic. We wanted to do Tetris with fragility, and there's a beautiful mock-up that we have over there. We wanted to use groceries as a metaphor because it was familiar. We thought that'd be something that would be a little bit fresh and engaging, that would be a little bit different. And really, we were going to infuse the game with character through our customers. You wanted to keep customers happy, and there was going to be a variety of different customers, and they get impatient if you're taking too long, and they get upset if you broke something, et cetera, et cetera. So we built out this version of the game, and we're prototyping it, and it's coming along pretty well. The mechanics are pretty fun. There's interesting challenges that we can introduce, but it still felt a little bit bland. It felt a little bit dry. And just one day, our artist was just kind of doodling around, and he made this little piece here, which was just a bunch of different sketches of different faces, effectively, and different characters on a milk carton. And he kind of sheepishly went up to people just like, hey, what do you think of this? And immediately all of our eyes lit up. It prompted all kinds of crazy creative discussion that we had in the studio. It kind of took over our morning. We immediately recognized, okay, this is going to be a lot more valuable. And there's a lot of really cool things that came from this. It basically opened doors, obviously, for there to be character in every single one of the grocery items. They could have relationships. They were very expressive, so it helped to communicate some of the gameplay stuff we had. Now, if you're about to go through and drop milk on top of the eggs can look up and start shaking with fear, and immediately it helps communicate what's going on without having to have complicated UI elements and things of the like. It also kind of tapped into this natural desire, if these are really cute little characters, you want to keep them safe. You don't want to go through and crush them. Although I guess in Rampage, maybe it's also the schadenfreude of wanting to go through and smash really cute, cuddly things. But basically, that's what led us to go through and create kind of our cast of characters that we have in Baggett, this really diverse group of guys. And it seems like it's an obvious choice, and it's been very successful for us, but it's really something that we debated quite a bit internally, because we knew that making a bunch of stylized groceries versus making a whole set, a whole cast of grocery characters was going to be much higher investment. It was going to change our development timeline that we wanted to have. We're going to get less games out that year as a result. But at the end of the day, we had that flexibility, and we were able to make that tactical choice to really embrace that surprise that came up, and it took us in a really great direction. If you're going to be going down the pipeline of going through and building your own IP, it's really important to go and respect it and really take it seriously. It would have been really easy for us just to take some googly eyes and slap it on a bunch of groceries and get it out the door. But we really felt it was going to be much more valuable for us to spend a lot of time developing these characters. And a lot of building an IP is not just finding out what's cool, but trying a ton of different things and then crossing out the stuff that you don't think perfectly works. And there's a lot of different techniques that we'll talk about here, but you can see our emote sheets for some early explorations that we had for the eggs and for Lucky, our cereal box, and little relationships between the two. So a really interesting kind of product of this is we had this big debate about Sunshine. Sunshine's our orange juice character, and we're making the destroyed state. We're kind of tipping off boxes, going through that sprint, and we ended up putting together that crush state that we had for her, and immediately people on the team had this strong emotional reaction. They said, like, well, that Sunshine wouldn't just be beat up like that. She's got a backbone, she's got a character. We've been talking about all the roles and relationships between the characters, and all of a sudden people felt like, well, that's not Sunshine. That doesn't fit. And so we went through and explored, and we did this other version, like, okay, well, she's kind of, okay, she's standing up for herself, et cetera, et cetera. But then she looked a little bit too vindictive, like she might go and like stab you in the ribs. And so we were like, okay, well, that's not Sunshine either. And we went back and forth and back and forth. We ended up going with the destroyed state you see on your right, but what was really cool about that is it reflected the fact that all the time that we've been investing as a group in trying to develop these characters out was really resonating. And if you guys aren't having any, if you're developing an IP and you're never having internal debates about what makes sense and what doesn't, then you might not have strong enough rules for your IP. It might be too kind of loosey-goosey and you're just kind of throwing everything in there. You might not be testing the boundaries of those rules enough. You establish them early and then you're just kind of going through the motions, which limits your opportunities to find really cool, new and interesting stuff. Or worse, your team doesn't really care enough about the IP. They're not as invested in the IP as they could be. So those are all good kind of litmus tests that'll hopefully give you a clue. And I think at this stage, especially when you're developing it early, anytime you see a conflict, it's always better to run towards it rather than to run away from it, because those are opportunities really to reveal a lot of the coolness about your game that is kind of lurking in the midst of it. So another really cool thing is just plan for swag. And we went through and we built, as you can see, we've got these little plush spilt toys that we had made in China, we sourced out. But really thinking of your IP seriously and taking it seriously means, what are some cool consumer products that we could make based on this brand? And I think it'll really cause you to think about your audience, think outside of the box, think about cool new ways in which you can go and present your IP to people in different ways. And all of those will be really, really helpful when it comes time for you to self-promote your game, market your game. Also, obviously, it helps to give to press people and bring to conferences and things along those lines as a little memorable token of what your game is all about. Having something sitting on someone's desk that they take home is a really potent reminder. It's also really valuable just to kind of prove it to yourself. Even mid-development, the moment we got those spilts back, having that character sitting on our desk made it feel like a real tangible thing even before the game came out. And it really caused us to say, okay, we're dealing with a serious brand. Even though it's our brand, we really need to go through and do it justice. So another key way as well, if you're trying to bring uniqueness into your game, is to have it be a reflection of your team. Your team is really this kind of unique, diverse collection of clever, silly, creative people, and they're always going to be able to bring some kind of unique perspective to the game. And I think players can tell when people had fun making the game, when there's a little bit of that playfulness, that silliness that kind of makes its way in, and it makes it feel handcrafted. And one of the best examples of this for me was Little Big Planet. And when you're playing through this opening level and there's little cardboard cutouts and whatnot of the development team that's popping up, when I was playing this, it felt like the game just gave me a big hug. It was this really friendly, engaging, warm thing, and it makes you feel like, even if that wasn't even necessarily the case, I felt like this was something that a bunch of people had crafted for me to enjoy. And I think that's a really powerful emotion to tap into with your audience that'll help them engage that much more. So our second key, relatability. And that's really about going through and hooking people and then keeping them attached to your game for as long as possible. So obviously any game that you're developing or you've made has hooks in it. It's why you picked a certain genre, you picked certain features, characters, art style, tone. All of those things are things that players already generally will have some kind of a preference for that you're hoping to tap into in a meaningful way. But in general, the more you can tap into some of the existing player skills that they already have and feelings they have, the better. One of my favorite quotes that we had from playtests that we had for Baggett was someone who said, "I feel like I've been training to play this game my entire life." There's a lot of different theories about what fun is exactly, but one of the predominant ones is it's applied learning. And the more ways in which you can tap into what players already had before they even were introduced to your game, the more you can help them feel clever and engaged right off the bat. So that's a really powerful technique that you can use at your disposal. So just looking at hooks, and hooks can manifest in a variety of different ways. One of the most common ways they tend to manifest is in ensemble casts, and this is in all media. So whether it's the judges of American Idol or boy bands or fighting games, all of these choices for exactly how these people are dressed, how they were cast, et cetera, are very specific because they want to try and hit as broad an audience as possible. Not every single character isn't trying to appeal as many folks as possible. It's every single one is trying to engage you in a unique way. Every boy band will have the preppy guy and the wacky guy and the surly guy and everything else. And fighting games are notorious for this, where they just, Soul Calibur in particular, in part because of the weapons and they're pulling from history and everything. So, whether you want to play as a pirate or as a samurai or whatever the hell Voldo is, all those things are really unique, interesting ways where there's at least something here, whether it's the character, their weapon, the animations, where they're from, their star sign, their blood type. They're desperate to throw as many hooks as they possibly can to get you to go through and originally put a quarter into the machine. And I think that kind of mentality isn't all that different from the state that we're in right now, where there's a barrage. People are like walking into an arcade, and you need to try and find some way to pull them towards your machine and get them to go through and plug quarters into your game as a whole. So we obviously did something very similar here with Baggett. Every single one of our characters has a unique color palette. They've got a unique tone. Spilt's a little bit more surly. Fizzy's kind of wound up and about to explode. If you agitate him too much in the bag, he pops. Eggward's a little more surly, et cetera, et cetera. But every single one of these are different. They're obviously different grocery products as well. What's really, really powerful about this, and we have this when we talk to a lot of consumer good people about our plush toys and whatnot, they brought up this kind of rule of 3, where if you're going to have a plush toy, it's much more valuable for you to have 3 than to have 1, because even if someone walks up to your toys and they're pretty much indifferent to them, if you've got 3 of them, then inherently their mind is just going to go and pick a favorite out of the group and a least favorite. And at that moment, they're a little bit more emotionally connected and invested than they would be otherwise. And hopefully they're already intrigued to begin with, but that takes them one step closer to actually making a sale point. So presenting variety and letting players play favorites is a really valuable tool. And when we focus tested these, it was a pretty wide swath. Some people, each of these characters got a vote as least favorite, and each of these characters got a vote as most favorite. And that's really the most important thing. We don't want every character to appeal to everyone, but as long as there's someone there that someone connects to, that's the most important thing. So another really valuable tool and this works when building ensemble casts, but also when you're comparing features and things along those lines, is obviously to do a comparative analysis, especially in a different medium or genre. I know when we were developing Baggett, when we were thinking about our characters, we talked a lot about SpongeBob, and we talked about Winnie the Pooh, and we talked about lots of different ensemble casts of characters because we wanted to find out, okay, so what role did Patrick play versus SpongeBob versus Squidward versus Mr. Crab versus all these things? That grouping works, clearly. It's tried and true. How do our characters kind of fit into that? And you don't need to map it 1-to-1, and our characters don't map 1-to-1 to SpongeBob, but whether that's SpongeBob or if it's, depending on your game type, it's Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or Seinfeld or any of these things where there's a group of people that are working together and there's clearly cohesive energy there, that's a good basis that you can draw upon just in order to help you get a sense of whether or not your characters fit and if the roles are overlapping too much. In a different game that I worked on, Rise of the Argonauts, way back when, we often talked about the X-Men in terms of defining familiar roles, visual style, personalities, et cetera, et cetera. Again, another example of going through and mapping these things over. So an interesting aspect of this is the storytelling and how you tell the story of your IP. We focus more on building a universe rather than telling a very specific story. And some of that was forced by circumstance. We had tons of ideas for little Mrs. Pac-Man style puppet theater narrative things that would happen between levels, but we just didn't have time in order to go through and put all those together. So instead what we did is all of our level packs have these little vignettes, these kind of fashion like Archie comics, like those covers that are just like, here's a slice of one chunk of our narrative. Spilt and Sunshine are a couple and Cousteau doesn't like it. That's it. But at least it gives you the sense that these groceries are interacting and they have some kind of a living presence outside of just the gameplay that you're ultimately playing. This is Lucky kind of meandering down. He's got the scarf, so it kind of sells him as being this kind of quiet little innocent character with the Scooby-Doo eyes of Spilt watching him as he's going through these kind of misty hallways. And it turns the grocery store a little bit into a fantastic place. And the more that we're kind of just teasing those things, CD is a pirate that everyone's scared of, little simple things like that really helps to bring those characters to life. And they feel like there's more of a story going on in the game than we're actually communicating to people. And what's actually really cool about that is players start to go through and fill in those gaps. If you're just telling them specific stories, they're always just going to be necessarily waiting for the next episode. All the onus is on you as a developer in order to come up with those. If you're kind of building that framework, it lets the players kind of fill in the gaps. We don't go too much into exactly the details of exactly how all of these characters talk and communicate and everything else, but you provide enough of a framework, then players can go through and fill it in from there, make their own world. So the last key here is intrigue and building intrigue, trying to go through and get people really interested in what your product's all about. So obviously the key thing, a lot of grim images I just realized going through my really friendly casual thing, but that's okay. A lot of people look at the press and customers and they're entirely different marketing strategies. In many ways, for just looking at it from a development perspective, they're not really all that different. I like to look at press as basically customers that have way less time to play your game because they've got so much stuff in their queue. So as a result, you really need to be on top of your game. And one of the key lessons that I learned when talking to press is always making their job as easy as possible. Know what your bullet points are, make it really easy for them to go through and create their article, their review, what it's going to be. So part of that is really knowing your strengths, highlighting them in game and in your correspondence with the press, and then ensuring that they don't have any trouble at all finding the most interesting bits. And all of those rules are really, really valuable for dealing with your customers too. It speaks to your screenshot that you have on the App Store. It speaks to your app description. It speaks to what you have in your first kind of 30 minutes of gameplay, or first minute of gameplay, 5 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And I think one of the issues that a lot of games run into is they're a little too precious about their coolest features. It doesn't really matter if you've got this really cool element, as I mentioned before, but if you haven't hooked people first, they may bail on your game. People's attention spans are so short when it comes to these titles. If they aren't grabbed by it right away, they're just going to move on to something else. So what I like to think of is if you look at all the different hooks that you have in the game, pretend that your customer only cares about one of them. All the other ones are just crap. They're not interested at all. But if they see that one hook, then they're going to be totally into it. So you want to try and give them as much of an opportunity to catch a sneak peek at that hook to make sure that they stay invested in your game. And it doesn't have to be introducing the feature itself. I mean, in Castleville, the Duke's Kingdom is kind of this incredible, over-the-top, opulent, there's unicorn gardens and all kinds of crazy nonsense. And if that's what you're into, at least it gives you a tease of what could possibly await. So it's a great way in which they solve a number of different problems while at the same time giving you some aspirational content along the way. And console games obviously do a really good job of this as they shifted more and more. God of War was one of the kind of the pioneers of sorts with this. We're really making your first 30 minutes the best 30 minutes of your game rather than just having it be this tutorial that you're kind of slogging through. So we ran into this in Bagot in particular with Rampage mode, as I talked about before. As we focus tested it, some people love Rampage mode. That's their favorite thing. Everything else in the game is, it doesn't really matter as long as they can get to Rampage mode. But the challenge was you really need to know what the core rules of the game are in order to appreciate Rampage mode. You need to know about placement and rotation, and you need to have a sense of what's fragile and what's heavy, et cetera, et cetera. So we couldn't just give it to players right off the bat. So our solution was really give player choices as we unlock them throughout the game. So we'd have these little pop-ups that would appear. We locked Rampage mode right off the bat. But right after you get through the tutorial section of the game, you've earned enough stars where we present you with this pop-up that says, hey, you want to go let off some steam? Go play Rampage mode. And the players that are already kind of predisposed to wanting Rampage mode, this is all they need. And they dive right into Rampage mode, and then they just live there for the rest of their session as a whole. A lot of them actually come back to other modes after they've played through Rampage. But basically what it does is it lets the player pick their own paths. We haven't locked it away right off the bat. We've given them an opportunity to get a sense of what all the different modes are in the game, and then they can kind of pick where they want to spend most of their time. So we have a very open-ended kind of progression system in Bagot as a result, which I think was really helpful and helped maximize our reach. So, I mean, one of the key questions is your game intriguing enough? It's something you're always asking yourself bit by bit when you're thinking about features and the brand as a whole. And really, the best way to do it is just to test it out, try it on as many people as possible, and test some more. You want to figure out whatever your best pitch is. You know, I've been in console development where you have to go through and be pitching to publishers and things along those lines. And when you're in the indie world, it's easy to kind of fall back on your laurels and say, I don't have to worry about any of that stuff anymore. But actually you do. Obviously, you need to try and hone exactly what the essence of your game is and communicate it as succinctly as possible. And one of the best ways to do it is just to try it out on strangers. We actually stood outside of Ralph's down in LA and just with our iPad and just waited as people walked by and said, hey, do you want to try a grocery bagging puzzle game? Do you like mobile games? Do you want to try out a mobile game? Have you ever tried playing on an iPad? Just people just walking by. It's very humbling in general, but if nothing else, you actually can see what pitches work and what pitches don't, what's going to attract people's attention and what isn't. And really, any reaction that you get from people is good. We got a lot of these when we said grocery bagging puzzle game, but they still stopped what they were doing and they came over and they tried it out. And it's an important thing to remember is that, you know, obviously Bagot's not necessarily high on the list, probably grocery bagger in terms of wish fulfillment games, but it's not necessarily sexy, but it is intriguing. And that's all that really matters. If you can get someone to take another look, you're one step closer to hopefully getting their download or their purchase as you go. So just to kind of wrap up things at a high level, you know, one of the big challenges here, it's great to go through. Everyone obviously would love to go through and have a really strong IP. Making it happen is obviously easier said than done. You need to make sure that you have the right environment. You need obviously a strong core mechanic to support that IP in a meaningful way. Your team needs to be able to execute. And you really, as I said, you need to have the right culture in your studio to encourage people to be contributing creatively. They need to feel comfortable to go up to the lead designer, whomever it may be, and present an idea and not feel like they're going to be shot down. And I think the more ways in which you can create that kind of a collaborative environment, you're really going to be able to tap into all the different ideas that are lurking within the people that are on your team. So, you know, if they're talented, they're vocal, and then they feel comfortable expressing ideas. And if you have that time and you've given yourself that buffer to let you iterate and explore different ideas, obviously you have to draw the line at some point, but especially in the early stages of the project, you do yourself a disservice, I think, if you just lock in on a particular path and then just try and ram it out. So just to kind of follow up on the stuff we've talked about thus far, uniqueness, obviously it's important to go through and embrace surprises. Respecting your IP enough to take it seriously and invest the energy in really fleshing it out. But at the same time, make sure that you're having fun and you're making it your own. And it's something that only we as a group, if you look at your team, only we as a group could have come up with this particular IP, because there's that little nugget of that idea that the lead programmer had, and this idea that my business partner had, or whatever it may be. I look at Baggett and I see reflections of all of us in the game as a whole. And I think that's it speaks to the unique character that we've been able to go through and bring to it. Creating as many hooks as possible in order to maximize how relatable your game ultimately is, while at the same time leaving the player some room to fill in the gaps, can also be really powerful. I know I've been talking about IP, but this also applies to the design of your game. If your design allows for players to come up with creative solutions on their own, they're inherently crafting something effectively within the game, and it gives them that much more of a greater sense of ownership. So that's another facet. Intrigue, obviously have your best stuff up front. Don't be shy about it. Make sure you've got some way to go through and tease those hooks that you've gone through and crafted to make sure that you can really capitalize upon it. And then be really confident in your pitch, because you've tried it out on random people in a parking lot. So that's my talk. Thank you guys so much.
All right, so we have 4 minutes. So I think we got time for maybe one question. So anyone? Two questions.
Two questions. We have two. Yeah, minimally.
All right, right.
Hi. We work in the service industry, and often when making a game, it's about like, well, is it going to be endless, going to be level-based, pros and cons? And I like that Baggett has both, and even the endless also has a bit of level-based stuff for it. Do you have any stats or feedback on like which one worked best for you?
In terms of endless modes versus the standard level progression? They're both, obviously most people, most of the sessions actually take place within the standard level progression, in part because it's how we introduce the mechanics and we unlock the endless modes later on. So that probably skews the numbers a little bit. But obviously having an endless mode within your game, I think the combination of the two is really valuable, just because you get the best of both worlds. Even if we talked at first, when we originally thought of the game, it wasn't going to be handcrafted level by handcrafted level. It was going to be an endless mode, basically kind of borrowing from Tetris and things like that. But I think even if you just had one level pack that introduces the variety and helps to show people what's so cool about your game and the interesting different types of challenges and techniques that you need, and then before transitioning into an endless mode, I think that can be really valuable. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Okay,
thank you.
One more right here.
First off, thanks for the presentation. Really cool stuff.
Cool, thank you.
In terms of the press, to your point, they're inundated. There's a million of us saying, hey, over here. And you've got some really unique hooks. I'm just wondering what pearls you can share with the group in terms of how you broke through the clutter. Because while your stuff's cool, everybody's saying, but my stuff's cool too. So maybe you can give some insight.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, to be honest, some of these are tried and true. Part of it's just being a pain in the ass. And just pestering them incessantly. I think, as an indie in particular, really kind of playing the indie card is really helpful. I think a lot of people, they respect the fact that people are gone off and they're pursuing their dreams and things along those lines. So I think, it's one thing to draft up the perfect form letter that summarizes all of your things in bullet points. It's another thing to really make an earnest plea and kind of put yourself out there, show that there's a person behind it. And I think it goes back to kind of that handcrafted feeling. And once that tone is established with them, then all of a sudden every single other aspect of the game starts to feel like something that, they're supporting the little guy a little bit. So I think that's probably the most valuable technique beyond just, again, hopefully being able to sum up what's cool about your game in a very short period of time, ideally in a screenshot. Because as long as that one image is intriguing, you've just increased your odds. But to some extent, it's still a crapshoot, So there's so many people out there. No worries.
Okay, thank
Cool.
you very much.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.